Everyone, this is update for March 10, but also 9, 8, and I believe 7, um, to 2023, days 380 of the war, end of the date update. So I'm gonna start with strategic events that's sort of outside of Ukraine, Russia, and then I'm gonna switch to actually a little bit of strategic discussion for Ukraine and Russia, and then I'm gonna do walks through the front line. So first, obviously China. As you probably aware, the Chinese president was approved by essentially Chinese parliament. So what happened in November? He was approved or sort of proposed by Central Committee of the Communist Party. So that's just the really the top of the Chinese political ruling class, and then sort of he got broader approvals from sort of like lower level. Um, I wouldn't call them bureaucrats, but effectively members of the Communist Party, essentially. So he needed sort of it's like a two-step process. So uh, closed knit circle elects him, and then you need stamp of approval from a broader group, which is technically Parliament, Communist Party Parliament, and I think he got like close to 3,000 votes. Pretty much everyone supported him. There were also appointed other senior members to run the country. Not all of them actually are his people. So some of them are from this, let's say, trade-oriented faction that just basically wants to conquer the world through trade, not through the force. Um, so there was some kind of balance there. I'll let you know as I sort of as there is more news and details come out, but it wasn't sort of one-sided victory the way it looked during the Central Committee meeting in November. At the same time, he maintained control. He's in full control, but it's just he has some call it checks and balances. Let's put it this way. I'm sure that he will consolidate the power in the coming year or so, and he will get rid of those sort of check and balances. But for now, it's not sort of so one-sided the way it looked in November. At the same time, I mentioned that the Chinese economy is not doing well. This export-oriented business model is essentially broken for China, and electing a person who has no idea what to do in this situation is the worst that can be done, let's say, for China. And the only option in this case for the person who doesn't know how to fix the economy is to use military power. And so it's the chances are increasing. Obviously, I'm sure it's obvious to everyone of use of military power. Not so much because China wants to get Taiwan back. That is, as I said before, is essentially a assured situation for China. They have essentially Taiwan in their pocket. The situation is more of that U.S. is blocking access to technology with sanctions, creating problems for the Chinese exporters, especially of technological goods, specifically, for example, for 5G networks. Most of the world is using Huawei equipment and ZTE. And now many countries are reconsidering there, especially in Europe, and banning it. For example, I think Germany a couple days ago banned Huawei equipment and ZTE from their 5G networks. I'm sure that most of the Europe will follow. So it's essentially destroying lucrative export markets for these Chinese companies. I think in Europe, the only two countries that sort of banned from this Chinese supply from the very sort of beginning were UK and Sweden. The rest of the Europe is sort of hooked on this Chinese companies simply because it's cheaper. To be very blunt, they are competitively stronger. There's no question about this Chinese companies from just purely price perspective. But if you really look from because in these cases you always need to add security sort of price, and then it makes more expensive because this is a huge security vulnerability if your network is run by China. So it essentially means that they control the network, and there's no security privacy on that network. And so that really destroys the business of these giants and basically puts them in question. What's going to happen to these giants? So essentially, the US is really disrupting Chinese trade, Chinese export model, and it's already sort of in difficult situation, and they kind of like putting it even in more difficult situation. So this creates huge irritation within China, and then that's why we're seeing such blunt reactions from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China, where they literally warning that there will be military confrontation if the US will continue with its path. At the same time, everything sort of continues on that path against which China is warning. So, for example, recently, Netherlands banned sale of semiconductor manufacturing equipment to China. This is specifically, I'm referring to ASML. So this is essentially monopoly in the production of semiconductor manufacturing equipment, specifically in lithography process. That is essential component in making semiconductors. So, as I said, as I just want to repeat, the summary is Chinese economy is an extremely difficult situation, and so the Chinese president doesn't have any plan, and so the only option out to distract sort of the population is channel all of that negative energy outside. So at the same time, not everything is sort of so bad for China. Chinese diplomacy made huge gains in Persian Gulf. So they brokered peace deal essentially between Saudi Arabia and Iran. They were both countries were like at extreme odds. It was just essentially Cold War in the whole region between the two countries. So like all of that fighting in Yemen, that's all funded by Iran. Iraq is sort of controlled by Iran, Syria. So all of that is aimed at Saudi Arabia. So what really was this brokered peace deal, what this really means is that China is essentially becoming military guarantee for Persian Gulf and displacing US. That's really, I would say, close to existential threat there. Because if US is displaced, this also creates economical threat for the US, and not to mention the energy threat and just general security for the Western world, and especially security of energy supplies. Because right now, Russia is sort of cut off. The other major supplier is Persian Gulf. And if they decide to stop it, there is not really much to replace it, because US is essentially close to be self-sufficient in crude oil, even though the crude from um, basically the production is looks like there is initial signs of decline, probably due to the energy policy by the current U.S. administration. So this could be really a difficult sort of energy crunch, orchestrated potentially by China and Russia if they need to. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but they have huge leverage there. So this is again China and um, how China is really increasing its influence and essentially slowly taking over the role of the U.S. In the world. Um, the next, let's switch a little bit um, to actually U.S. So in the U.S. Parliament, in the lower chamber that's controlled by Republicans, there was initiative from this mm, uh, far wing, and I wouldn't call it right because that's not really about right. It's basically one extreme wing um, of the Republican Party. They proposed the law to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. It did not pass, but it gained 103 yes votes. The interesting part, and this is similar to how it was, I think, in December or November of the last year, where there were actually 56 Democrats voting, and that one is this, essentially communist left wing of the Democratic Party, and then you have 47 Republicans, which is again the other extreme. That's I wouldn't call it like right. It's just more extreme. That's really determined mm, to basically reduce U.S. to just basically the local sort of power at all costs, and even if it hurts the U.S. as country, because essentially U.S. receives huge benefit, economic benefit, by having U.S. dollar as a world currency, as reserve currency, and that obviously is supported by military presence around the world, and also the crude oil production. That U.S. is a major player, and it also guarantor of essentially of independence of many of those countries in Persian Gulf. So that's and by actually undermining all of that, this part of the Republican Party is essentially trying to undermine the standard of living in the U.S. Because if all of that goes away, the standard of living in the U.S. will drop by at least 2 times, and if not 3 times. So it'll become, just average country, like nothing extraordinary. This will be huge, sort of negative effect, like it's like falling dominoes, including potential financial crisis related to very high interest rates, because nobody would want to finance U.S. debt and U.S. borrowing, because everybody understands U.S. is living beyond its means, and it's being financed by everybody around the world. So that will stop. Nevertheless, for them, they don't care about that. That's more important to sort of break the current system in the U.S. That's their goal of this group, and that's very clear. Then, related to all of this, the goal of this group is to cut funding for Ukraine, basically to zero, and any support. This is obviously very logical within the strategy. They want sort of undermine U.S. sort of presence around the world. So Ukraine is sort of most prominent example, and so the goal is that there is very clear consensus building among broader Republican Party not to continue um, funding Ukraine, and it was very clearly stated by the uh, head of their lower chamber, Kevin McCarthy, who is Republican, obviously, because they have a majority there, and he stated he did not respond positively to invite by Ukrainian president to visit Ukraine. So basically, there is a very tense relationship there, essentially Cold War. I would say I would blame significantly actually Ukrainian leadership for that because it's extremely incompetent. It's totally, I would say, does not understand that they need to keep the balance between the two opposing parties in sides in the U.S. and it's extremely one-sided with the Democrat sort of side, and obviously that creates problem even at the sort of at the personal level. Um, so, anyways, so it looks like the funding is going to be available through the mid of the year. And then the funding, there is very high chance that the funding will be cut off. The reason I'm saying that is because all of the funding, the lower chamber, in the way it's done, in the way the power is structured in the US, is that lower chamber is essentially in charge of spending money of the budget, not the upper chamber. So if they decided not to sort of do that, then nothing will happen. And uh, so, so the problem is not only those 47 Republicans. There is a just generally even sort of moderate, even Republicans who are really understanding the threat that's coming from Russia, and that this is really not just Russia, that they work together, Russia and China. It's essentially one system. They are sort of starting to side and shift in this direction. Okay, let's cut off Ukraine. So we'll see what happens. But this is really this storm is brewing for Ukraine. It's not going to be happening right now. It's probably something for August, September timeframe. And so this is obviously Ukraine totally depends on financial and military aid. Without that, it will fall pretty quickly at this point. There is no internal resources, and I can definitely blame Ukrainian corrupt political class and military class top for all of these problems. That there is no resources in Ukraine. The same time, it is what it is. This is the situation in Ukraine right now, and if you remove that support, it will sort of basically fold. Then now let's actually switch a little bit to Russia and what's going on there. So first interesting news is that forgot one more thing. So there is a very high chance of the war between Israel and Iran. And essentially, Israel is in really bad situation at this point because because Saudi Arabia now has a peace with Iran, and essentially all of those Persian Gulf countries essentially have a peace or truce, and they're not gonna sort of support Israel. So Israel is kind of becoming politically isolated in the Middle East or Near East, probably better way to say it. Proper, I think, more correct, but not sure why it's. For some reason, in English, it's actually Middle East, but I would say Near East is more correct name for it. But essentially, Israel is becoming isolated and in very actually dangerous situation there. And the other problem for Israel is that Iran managed to enrich the uranium basically increased the amount of isotope uranium-235 to 80%, which I think it's not far away from basically getting to have nuclear bomb. And that obviously will be existential threat for Israel. There's no question about that. Plus, oh, by the way, on this topic, it's very just, this is obviously speculation, but the ability of Iranian sort of researcher scientists to enrich uranium to such a high level within a short period of time, it's very interesting because it's almost impossible to do that without external help. And I'll let you sort of guess where that help is coming from. And then on a related topic, there is very strong rumors that Iran finalized purchase of Su-35 fighter jets from Russia, which are modern ones. They're not sort of like old stuff that they have right now in Iran. It's very comparable, against the F-16, F-15. So basically, it's on par with those. And so now Israel doesn't have clear air superiority. It's a question about the skills of Iranian pilots to use it and all that stuff, because you may get the equipment, but it may not be used effectively. But the threat is clearly there. And so there is a high chance of preemptive attack, preemptive war by Israel against Iran, and it's, I would say, very high. Everybody wants to avoid it, but this is another sort of area where the war could sort of start in this whole in this big region, I would say. You probably also saw situation in Georgia, it's in Caucasus, then similar problems in Moldova. So the whole region is extremely unstable. There's a lot of tension areas that can easily turn into war zones, let's put it this way. Now let's actually switch to I want to mention a little bit about the European industry, and it's sort of slowly dying. So there is a company called Speyer Aluminium in Germany. They closed down their smelting smelter, aluminium smelter that they have in Germany. It was actually 50% idled. There was remaining 50% was totally shut down. Is to be shut down this year. That's a 70,000 metric tons of aluminium per year. This is the way they do it. It's not sort of primary aluminium that's sort of freshly melted from the from the raw resources, but from the ore, but it's actually recycled. So what this really means is another drop in the bucket of inflation, right? Because there is less or fewer aluminium produced. This will, and aluminium is extremely important material, for example, for the cars, for the engines of the cars. This is almost like irreplaceable. And so, again, then there are other news that I mentioned before that U.S. put very high tariffs on the Russian aluminium. Then Canada is banning Russian aluminium steel. So all of this helps to continue inflation very high for foreseeable future. And then there's again, this is it's all interconnected world. So I just want to mention about this failed bank in the U.S., Silicon Valley Bank. not so much about the bank. The problem is that the rising interest rates by in Federal Reserve and other central banks in the West, they create huge pressure on the balance sheet of all banks, and sort of the weaker links sort of blow up, and that can create sort of domino effect in the financial system, in the banking system. So far, this looks like it might be contained, but this is not the only bank, and it's number 18, so it's not a tiny bank in the U.S. So again, there is a problem that if central bank in the U.S. wants to kind of reduce the rates, this will really ignite inflation. So they also becoming in very difficult situation between basically like let's say a rock and a hard place. I think that's how it's said in English, where one way, if you don't keep interest rates high, inflation goes through the roof, and there is basically pretty much like social unrest is guaranteed. Or if you keep them high, then the banking system may blow up. So, which again leads to similar outcomes. And so, this is extremely difficult situation in the West and specifically in the US. So, as you can see, there's so many challenges and so many tensions everywhere around the world that it's almost guaranteed that something will blow somewhere in very negative, bad way. And I'm not talking about the war in Ukraine. Just potential for some kind of conflict somewhere in the world is extremely high, and meaning the conflict that's not just the local one, but it's going to be felt globally. Now let's actually switch to Russia. And in Russia, as I said, wanted to say is interesting news is that all of the government employees and employees who work basically for government companies, there is a term in Russia that it's a state-run capitalism, which is it's not a capitalism, but I'll call it fascism, corporate fascism. It's probably the correct name of the system, economic system in Russia that's been built. But basically, if you work for those state corporations, you're not allowed to leave the country, and all of the government employees not allowed to leave. They they essentially have their passports revoked, and so they essentially cannot go outside of the country. And just for those who don't understand how it works, in the Soviet Union, right before it collapsed, everybody has two sets of passports. One is sort of internal passport that's used everywhere, for all purposes, and then you have second foreign passport for basically what it means for foreign travel. That one is just allows you essentially like a permit to leave the country. This obviously goes from the communist time, and before that from the Russian Empire time, where the situation was so bad in this territory that people were prohibited from leaving, and this was the tool. So now this tool again being used the way it's being used for the centuries in this whole area, and significant portion of the Russian population essentially cannot go outside of the country at this point. Then, in terms of Russian economy, Russian sort of finances, Russian trade surplus is shrinking pretty rapidly. Now it's 15 billion US dollars for cumulative January-February. This is 3 times less than what it was in January-February 2022, when it was 43 billion. So this is just another sign of brewing problems in Russian economy, Russian finances, state finances there. To add to Russian economic problems, looks like Turkey, which was the channel for, I would say, illegal uh, sort of trade to supply all of those sanctioned goods to Russia, basically consumer electronics, cars, everything, a lot, whatever Russia needed. It was, computers, all of that equipment was going through Turkey. So apparently, U.S. put some pressure on Turkey, and looks like that channel is, um, I would say, not totally closed, but it's getting much more complicated, and it will cost much more. So all of this sanctioned goods will become much more expensive in Russia and much more difficult to buy for the ordinary consumer. So most people will sort of feel, um, uh, on their own, on their personal life, the effect of the sanctions. Similar was done by Germany with Armenia, which was another channel how Russia was buying a lot of the sanctioned goods. So the um, German chancellor went and met with the Armenian president and basically said, "Okay, please stop this system, or we're just gonna block exports to your country." So as you can see, the screws are being sort of tightened on Russia to kind of increase the pain. It's not going to change anything in Russia, to be fair. This is, but it definitely going to be more painful inside there. Then other interesting news is that I mentioned that Russian military is definitely feeling is on shell or ammunition diet for sure, and there is no even question about that. The amount of shelling has been down significantly, not just like 10-20%, but probably like like two times overall. So there is a definitely shortage of shells. The way, and I explained before that Russia had a huge shell manufacturing facility in Novosibirsk that was used to manufacture about like 1.1 million shells per month. And that, so basically the annual production is about close to 14 million shells, which would be totally sufficient to supply a Russian army for the to support their sort of, I would say, military model, how their modus operandi, how they fight in Ukraine. But that facility has been destroyed, literally like within past 10 years. All of the equipment is lost, and so now there's this acute shortages developing for Russia, for Russian military. They do try to increase production, but I'm extremely skeptical that they will be able to get anywhere close to these numbers. So that really means that they will be on diet, on extreme diet, and that's part of the reason why Wagner mercenaries not getting what they used to get. It's not because uh, sort of they are singled out. The entire Russian military is not getting what they need as a whole. Um, and then obviously because of the tensions between the head of Wagner mercenaries and uh, Russian Minister of Defense, they get punished because there is good excuse. We don't have enough. We're not going to give them because we don't have enough ourselves. So there is that. Now it looks like the supply of the shells has been renewed, but not in the numbers that are needed by any means for Wagner mercenaries. So that obviously contributes um, to slow down around Bahmut. We'll discuss in more detail once I get the walkthrough I'll get to the walkthrough, but basically, uh, as organization, Wagner mercenaries basically exhausted, both from a human side and also from the ammunition side, and even the head, Evgeny Prigozhin, announced, I think today, that essentially looks like Wagner mercenaries, once they finish capturing Bahmut, that's going to be their sort of like last hurrah. And it looks like they will be pulled from the front line to restructure, rebuild. They will shrink. He is basically admitting that they don't have, there's not enough people who want to join them, even for the money, because the probability of dying they're extremely high. It's essentially kind of like a death machine. I mean, it achieves the results for the system, for the state, but on the individual level, it's a death machine. And so, he doesn't have enough volunteers. He cannot get the prisoners anymore. And so, what he looks like deciding to do, he decided to use ideology to draw people to it. But then he also realized that it's still, even with ideology, you will not get far, because the probability of dying is extremely high, and it's enough of deterrent for majority of people. So this there will be some kind of restructuring. They probably will sort of keep something on the front line, but that's just going to be sort of very nominal. The most of the organization will be pulled, and what's going to come to replace them will remains to be seen. This is not happening tomorrow. This is not happening in a week or 2 weeks. This is sort of probably a question of a month or two, maybe even three. But that's essentially, there is I wouldn't say a problem, but Russia as a country, as an invading force, is facing multiple problems at the same time. First of all, this ammunition situation. There is no clarity how to resolve it. The only realistic way is the help of China, but China so far doesn't look like they're willing to sort of join the war in sort of more straightforward way. They may well down the road, but not at this moment. And then they're also losing this Wagner mercenaries organization, which was the only unit that was delivering results. So this we may see just totally complete stalemate in couple months. Essentially, basically, once the Bahmut is captured by Wagner mercenaries, there is very high probability that Russia will face strategic dead end in Ukraine. So to actually address, and Russian political leadership realizes that. So what there are actually conversation right now in Russia among the political top is about actually hiring contract soldiers, specifically 400,000, and they plan to start it in April. Whether this effort is going to be successful or not remains to be seen. I'm extremely skeptical, and the reason they try to hire is because all of this mobilization that was done is totally unpopular in society. They clearly seeing signs that if they try to do another mobilization, it may lead to some social problems in Russia. And so they decided to sort of hire, but at the same time they don't have money. So this looks like a sort of, as I said, a strategic dead end, from which it's not very clear how Russia will get out. The only hope is that there is enough pain on the Ukrainian side, that the death toll is very high, and the ability of Ukrainian society to tolerate it will will go down, and it probably is going down because the death toll is high. There's no question about it. I think the death toll from both sides probably between 60 to 70,000 dead at this point. So, which is, as I said, for Ukraine it is much more painful because Ukraine is essentially 4 times smaller than Russia. So if you normalize it for the population, then Russia should be losing, let's say 7 by 4, 28, 280,000, and obviously they're not losing that. And that's why Ukraine is also facing strategic dead end. If Russia manages just to put the pressure and continue killing Ukrainians in the same pace, eventually Ukraine will run out of resources. Even from that perspective, Russia can win, and that's a problem. Again, goes back to the Ukrainian leadership, political leadership, and military leadership that leads Ukraine to disaster. The way they do it is gonna create problem for Ukraine. So strategically, Ukraine is gonna lose if this people will continue what they doing, which is by that I mean is completely inefficient use of very limited resources Ukraine has, and unfortunately they don't have sort of intellectual ability to use them more efficiently. So that's a problem Ukraine is facing over the long run, and by long run I don't mean many years. It's probably next 6 months, basically by the middle of the summer. Now let's actually switch to the sort of Ukraine. There was, as a side note, there was large Russian attack on Ukrainian power grid, power generation facilities on the night between the March 8 and 9. Many power generators were hit, specifically in Kiev. One was destroyed. So the attack was sort of combination. Part of it was against the power generators, and part of it was against the power distribution system, which means transformers. It did not reach sort of its intended goals because Ukraine economy is dead. So to supply electricity just to regular consumers, all you need is just nuclear power stations. And so even the Russian forces destroy this, coal and natural gas powered power generators. There are still nuclear ones that can supply. The only question is the transformers and the power lines. And looks like Ukrainian authorities still managed to somehow maintain the integrity of their power distribution network. Not sure for how long they will manage to do it. Russian attacks also not terribly sort of effective. So so far it still sort of survives. So this is the reason why Ukrainian authorities managed to restore supply of electricity to the broader population, and so this is the situation there. Now let's actually switch to the walk through the front line. We're gonna do it in a clockwise fashion, starting from very north, and starting from the sort of here on the border between Ukraine and Russia. So the situation along the state border remains intense. There are mostly, I would say, attacks from Ukrainian side. On the Russian side, there are sort of attempts to retaliate for all of this, rocket attacks and everything. And obviously, they are sort of needles against the elephant. They're not achieving much. Now let's move to the North Lugansk front line. Things here more or less the same. As you can see, Russian troops continuing attacks in the same area. without much success. So status quo remains here, but initiative is definitely in Russian hands. And just as a side note, this whole attacks are so predictable by Russian side that if Ukrainian command, Ukrainian military was better prepared, you can inflict literally huge losses and basically destroy all of this attacking uh, troops in a matter of the months. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So, but I'm just want to try to explain to everyone that Ukraine is not doomed. It's a problem. It's not a problem of sort of ordinary soldiers. It's a problem of leadership at the political and military level that is not competent and doesn't know how to do things efficiently, and that's where the problem stems from. Now let's look at the North Donbass front line, where things are bad, but they are a little bit more sort of stable these days because, as I said, Wagner mercenaries are getting somewhat exhausted. So as you can see, there most of the attacks here towards Bahmut on the flank. They trying to sort of advance here because they see that this whole area around Siversk, this is relatively, well, it's not, it's a town, let's put this way. It's not, at least it's not a village, so it's a town. And so they very clearly see that this is also getting outflanked and that they potentially can, capture all of this area. So they trying to push in this just like north western direction here. But let's actually look at the progress, what Russian troops managed to achieve over these 3 days. They captured this village here, Dubovo-Vasylivka. This is the name of the village. They also essentially captured all of this northern part of the Bahmut. So now there is metal processing plant here where I'm showing. So this is where the fight is going on right now. So the Wagner mercenaries are attacking this metal processing plant, which is exactly where I'm showing it right now. That plant is a great defensive position. Whether it's going to be used effectively is another question, but in general, it's excellent defensive position. So as I said, I think on the 7th, Ukrainian troops left the eastern bank of the river. Now, actually, Wagner mercenaries managed to cross the river and establish a small bridgehead here, where it's showing here. It's around the city market here. So this is what they captured. But overall, they slowly moving, basically squeezing Ukrainian troops out of the town. So the reason for that is that the front line here in this southern flank is pretty stable because I mentioned before there is this 3rd Brigade and 93rd Brigades. They are better quality, so the soldiers are sort of more willing to plug the holes with their bodies, so it's more or less stable. There is some advances here in the northern flank, but they really at this point quite contained. Not sure what exact units, because it's a mix of all of those brigades that's shown there. So, but somehow this has been stabilized. At the same time, not saying that Bakhmut will remain in Ukraine hands. The suffocation for the logistics has started, and it has been going on for a while. As you can see, this main road is essentially not usable during the day, so essentially you need to use just essentially field roads, so just go through the field, and that just doesn't provide enough supply of ammunition to the fighting forces in the core of the town, so it will be lost. It's going to be much more drawn process. And at the same time, your enemy is also getting weaker and exhausted. So its ability to push is also diminishing. So in a way, it's the the balance of power is somewhat sort of, on one hand you have less supplies, but then you also, your enemy is becoming weaker. So to extent it kind of like offsets and balances, but to which extent it's impossible to predict without being at the same time in the both camps. But the story that's being presented by Ukrainian military top, that this is great to keep Bahmut, it's obviously not true, because keeping Bahmut Ukrainian costs a lot of lives to Ukrainian army, and it's not 1-4 exchange or 1-3 exchange versus Russian side. It's essentially 1-1, 1.2-1 exchange. So it's not favorable. It's a strategic loss for Ukraine, strategic dead end here. At the same time, if Ukrainian troops will, retreat to the new defensive position, the same story will repeat as long as Wagner mercenaries are staying there. If they not, then the situation probably will changes, and it becomes a little bit better. And as I said, there's all indications are that Wagner mercenaries will be pulled from the front line once they finish capturing Bakhmut. Sort of like they will be allowed to leave on a good, from a Russian perspective, on a good note. And so this may actually stabilize here. We'll see what happens there. There are also rumors about this Ukrainian offensive. I would say Ukrainian army is totally not ready for it. It's not properly trained. Doesn't know how to use effectively the equipment that it's getting from the West. I'm mostly referring to tanks. So it's just there's I would say it's just I'm very skeptical, let's put it this way, about that whole thing. So this is just a quick look at how it used to be. Essentially, as you can see, not much of a sort of gain for Russian side over this 9 days, and this is sort of how it all started. So the whole problem was obviously the northern flank that was not, where Ukraine did not have strong troops, essentially. Well, or troops that are willing to basically exchange their lives for stopping Russian forces. So this is just essentially the same look and the same situation. Now let's jump to the central Donbass front line. Things here are sort of, I guess, similar. The same areas of attack, the same idea is regular Russian military wants to do the same, outflank Avdiivka and squeeze Ukrainian troops from Avdiivka. So far, their progress is extremely minimal. There are some advances here on the northern side of this Pisky salient, but it's just like advance of like 500 meters or 800 meters. This whole thing can continue another 6 months without really meaningful progress at all. Then this, I would say, insane and suicidal attacks in Marinka with no result, and similar in Novomikhailivka. So essentially, as you can see, regular Russian military is definitely not the force that can push regular Ukrainian military. Just because regular Ukrainian military, the soldiers have motivation versus the Russian side, they don't really, on average, they don't have motivation. There are some motivated units, there's no question about it, but as a whole, there is extremely poor motivation in the regular Russian military, and especially with all of these conscripts that dilutes the whole situation and makes it even worse from that perspective for the Russian military. So that might be actually part of the reason also why Russian political top wants to basically hire soldiers or basically get contract soldiers, because they see that this conscript army doesn't quite work. Now let's quickly check Zaporizhya front line. Things here are the same. Nothing is changing here. There's definitely no Ukrainian offensive here happening anytime soon, because most of those resources were consumed around Bahmut, which also, in some way, probably strategic victory for the Russian side, because they also removed the threat of imminent Ukrainian offensive for some time. There will be probably attempt, even Ukrainian officials, already declaring that they're going to do it in 2 months, which is, I would say, absolutely incompetent to even you're not supposed to say these things to your enemy, but nevertheless, this is another sign why they should not be in charge of defending Ukraine. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until next time, bye bye.